By this point, Vtubers have firmly cemented themselves as a growing niche in the otaku sphere, so it's no surprise that they've been making appearances in more and more trading card games. Up until now, this has been largely limited to appearances in other established TCGs like Wacross, Vtubers, Shadowverse, and Rebirth for you. However, as of September of 2024, Hololive, arguably the most prominent VTuber agency, has launched their own trading card game, and given how difficult it's been to find product, I'm going to assume that it's been a successful launch. I visited Japan in October, and while I wasn't able to find any starter decks while I was there, and only a single booster box, there were plenty of shops selling singles, so I was able to pull together a pair of decks to trial the game. While I have heard rumblings that Nanashi Mume and the Promise archetype in general are a little too dominant in the early game meta, I'll leave the meta-analysis and game balance discussions to more qualified channels. For this video, I'm going to stick to what I can confidently speak to, which is how to play, and how well the rules and everything else the game is doing comes together as a cohesive package. Before getting too much further, it's probably worth mentioning the elephant in the room here. This game is essentially a reskin of the Pokemon TCG. It does have a few unique points, but if you're familiar with Pokemon, a lot of the rules in Hololive are going to be very familiar. So let's get into those rules. You have a 50-card main deck containing holomems and support cards, with no more than 4 copies of a single card. Note that your holomems will come in different levels. Their basic debut level, as well as first bloom and second bloom evolutions. You need at least one debut in your starting hand in order to start the game, so make sure you factor that in when you're considering what your ratios are going to look like. Next, you have your 20-card cheer deck, which contains your resources, and then finally you choose one Oshi card. This acts as the leader of your deck. To start a game, you set your Oshi card face down, you shuffle your cheer deck, and then you shuffle the main deck and draw a 7-card hand. From there you have one free mulligan, where you can shuffle your hand back into the deck to draw 7 new cards. At that point, if you don't have any debut level holomems in your hand, you can reveal that hand to the opponent, shuffle it back in, and then draw 1 less card than the previous hand. And then, if that doesn't have any debut holomems, you can rinse and repeat. If you eventually mulligan down to 0 cards in this way, you just immediately lose the game. Once you have a starting hand, you set one of your debut holomems face down into your center stage, and then you can set up to 5 more face down in your backstage. Once both players have done this and are ready to start, all of the face down cards on the field are flipped face up. You then note the life number on your Oshi card, and you set that many cards from the top of your cheer deck face down as your life, and we're all set for the first turn. Turns begin with a reset step, where you can activate any of your resting holomems, and then if you have a holomem in your collab stage, that holomem is rested and returned to the backstage. Then, if you don't have a holomem in your center stage, you move an activated holomem from your backstage to center stage. And if the only holomem you have on your backstage are all resting, then you're allowed to take a resting holomem instead. Next, you move to your draw step, where you can draw 1 card from the deck. To finish this start of turn procedure, you have your cheer step, where you reveal the top card of your cheer deck and attach it to one of your holomems in play. Note that unlike many other TCGs, the first turn player does draw a card on their first turn, and they also get to play out a cheer from the cheer deck. There are 3 trade-offs for going first. You can't play support cards that are limited to 1 per turn, you can't perform, which is essentially an attack, and you can't bloom, which is essentially evolving. The second turn player also can't bloom on their first turn, but they are able to play limited support cards and perform. Now you're into the main step, and predictably there's a lot of different things you can do here. You can play out new holomems from your hand. In addition to your center, you can have up to 5 other holomems between your backstage or collab stage. You can also bloom your holomem in play. This is essentially evolving it to 1 level higher. Note that you can't bloom over a holomem that came into play this turn. You're also able to play out support cards from your hand. Some are events that apply an effect and are discarded, and others are tools or mascots that attach to a holomem and stick around. We can only play one limited support card per turn, but other than that, there's not really any restrictions or resources attached to how many support cards you can play. You can move a Holomem from your backstage to your collab stage. You can do this once per turn, and when you do, you add the top card of your main deck face down into your Holo Power. Holo Power acts as a resource pool that is used to pay for your Oshi's abilities. You can pay your center stage Holomem's baton pass cost in order to swap it with a Holomem on your backstage. Finally, our turn ends with a performance step, which is essentially an attack phase. Your center stage Holomem and the collab Holomem can each perform one art each, as long as they have enough cheer to meet the art's requirement. Each art can target either the opponent's center stage Holomem or their collab Holomem. Damage will persist through turns, and once a Holomem has more or equal damage to their HP, they retire and are sent to the archive alongside any other cards that are beneath them. When a Holomem in the center or collab stage retires, their owner reveals the top of their life and adds it to one of their other Holomem in play, giving them a bit of a leg up to begin their counterattack. Since we're going first, we can't enter our performance step on our first turn, so we just move into our end phase and pass the turn to the opponent. Like before, we'll draw a card, flip over a cheer, and despite the fact that this is a white cheer and Kiara in the center stage is red, Kiara's performances can use any color, which is common at the debut stage, so this is a convenient spot to put this white cheer as it'll let Kiara go ahead and perform this turn. Next, while we weren't able to use limited events on the first turn, the second turn player is under no such prohibition, so they're able to use a limited support card to draw 3 new cards. Next, from our hand that we just drew, we'll play out a Spot Holomem. Now these are very similar to debut Holomems, except spots can't bloom. Now we'll play out 2 more debuts and choose our collab Holomem for the turn. So we'll go ahead and choose Iris. She doesn't have any cheer, so she won't be able to perform, but moving her into our collab stage is still going to give us a crucial Holo Power, so we can use some of our Oshi's abilities later on in the game. With that set, we can move into our performance step. Iris, of course, doesn't have any cheer, so she's not able to perform, but Kiara has 1 cheer, which is all she needs to use her arts. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, when you perform, you're able to target either the Holomem on your opponent's main stage or their collab stage. In this case, we're going to go ahead and target Aki on the center stage, and the performance is going to deal 20 damage, and Kiara also has an effect that allows us to discard a card in our hand to deal an additional 20 damage, so we're going to go ahead and do that as well. That means that her performance has dealt a total of 40 damage to Aki Rosenthal, and we don't have any other Holomems able to perform this turn, so we're just going to go ahead and end our turn here. At this point, I've covered all of the basic rules, but I'll keep playing for a bit just to give a more general sense of what the pace and flow of the game is like before I get into the review segment. Moving over here, we start by tapping our collab and moving it back to the bench. We draw 1 card. We flip over cheer. It is green, so we will go ahead and again place that onto our Pecora over here. We have a limited supporter of our own, which will allow us to draw 3 cards. We're going to bloom to grow to 1 level higher. So we just take a Kobo that is an equal or higher level than the one currently in play and stack it over top. So this one's not going to do a whole lot of good since we don't have any energy to use its attacks, but we can move it up into the collab slot just to get 1 more Holo Power. Now we can just move into our performance step, and we have a simple attack that does a straight 30 damage over here. Back over on this side, we retreat the collab Holomem, draw 1 card, and add another cheer, which we'll put onto Iris down here. Next up, we'll bloom to Kiara. She has a different type of ability than we've seen so far. That's a on bloom effect, which is marked by a very convenient B in blue font. That lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 Holomem to hand, and then archive the rest. So we're going to go ahead and grab an Iris stage 1, and then archive the rest. We'll move archive to our collab stage, getting 1 more holo power. And we'll move to our performance step, where we can start off with this attack here for 40 damage, and then follow it up with Iris for another 30. That has now exceeded the HP of Aki Rosenthal, which means that she is defeated. So get that damage out of there and send both the Holomem and the energy into the archive. And then we take 1 card from our life, reveal it, and attach it to one of our Holomems in play. Now it's back over to this turn. And now we only have 1 active, so that needs to go back into center stage. Fortunately, that's the one that we want there anyways. Now we move into our draw step. We will attach the cheer down here to Kobo to get her ready. We're going to go ahead and bloom to a higher level.
It's me, Piccolo!
We'll place out a spot of our own over here for Marine. Currently doesn't have any energy on it, but we might as well, because we have Penlight. It lets us discard one of our holo power. When you use holo power, you discard from the top down into the archive, and then this just takes a cheer that matches the color of one of our cheers in play and adds it onto any of our Holomems. Now that we've got that all set up, we can move Marine forward to the collab slot, which adds 1 more holo power. It also triggers her collab effect, which allows us to roll a die. Unfortunately, the die was even, so the effect does nothing there. So we'll go ahead and move into our performance step. Marine's is very simple, it just deals 10 damage. And then we'll attack with Pecora's here, which does 50, plus a die roll multiplied by 10. So that's an extra 30 damage, which totals to 80, which is actually enough to defeat the opponent's center Holomem here. So it's archived along with all of its energy, and then from the life, we flip over the next energy and attach it to one of our Holomems. So we'll go ahead and put that over here. Back over to this side again. And we'll just push Kiara back into the center. Reveal the top card of our cheer and add it to one of our Holomems. Next up, we'll go ahead and assign a collab member, giving us 1 more holo power. Right now, we have a pretty vulnerable Kiara in our center spot, so we're going to go ahead and use the once per game ability of the Kiara Oshi. So you pay 1 holo power to pay the cost. This is a once per game effect, so you simply discard a card from the holo power, and that lets us take any Holomem from our archive and add it back to our hand. So we'll grab the stage 1 Kiara back to hand, which we can then immediately bloom onto the debut Kiara, and once again triggering that bloom effect where you look at the top 3, add 1 to hand, and discard the rest. Next up, since we can, we might as well bloom Iris over here, play another debut Kiara, and move into performance and attack through for 40 damage. From here, you can more or less see how the game progresses back and forth, and it continues until one player has fully run out of their life.
So that's how to play the Hololive trading card game. So is it actually worth picking up? For one, if you're a big fan of Hololive, the answer's pretty obvious. Even if you only pick up a couple of cards of your favorite Hololive VTuber, it's still a pretty great collectible item. The art is great and the card stock is nice and solid. And overall, the game itself does play well enough. It has a good pace and flow, and the characters have enough different archetypes to keep things interesting. If you have enough cards to build a deck, pulling it out now and again for the odd game will be a fun time. If you're not a fan of Hololive though, the game is a bit more of a mixed bag. It does play well enough, but it is really hard to get away from the Pokemon comparison. The games are very similar, and Pokemon has a much larger player base that's already established. Hololive does have a few unique points to it relative to Pokemon though. For one, having the energy come from its own deck does feel better, and it not only smooths out the game's resource development, but it also ensures that the cards you're drawing off the top of your deck at the start of your turn are just a little more exciting than a basic resource. I'd also say the implementation of the life system is a pretty objective improvement over Pokemon. In Pokemon, losing your active Pokemon is doubly punishing, since your opponent gets a free card from their prizes and you lose all of the energy that you invested into that Pokemon. Hololive's life doesn't give the winning player card advantage, and it also gives the player that's falling behind a free energy to try and get them back into the game. A minor gripe is that Hololive does still run into the Pokemon TCG's problem, where the winner can be a little obvious before the final turn due to damage generally being capped at 2 per turn, but this is a very minor issue, and it does feel like Hololive's changes to the game system do keep the race a bit tighter. The Oshi is another change from Pokemon, and while it is a nice addition that gives your deck an identity to build around, it's also a fairly minor improvement overall in terms of the impact it has on the game. Another, more subtle advantage of Hololive is that it doesn't have the basic Pokemon problem. Many Pokemon, from legendaries to fan favorites like Scyther or Mewtwo, have no evolutions, which makes them a much better value proposition than relying on progressing through multiple stages of other Pokemon. From GXs to the earliest meta threats, meta Pokemon lists often focus on these powerful base Pokemon, and despite being a core mechanic, evolution is often left aside. Because there's no pre-existing expectations in Hololive, all characters are able to use the bloom mechanic equally to grow and level up over the course of the game. So, evolution actually occupies the important space in gameplay that reading the rules would suggest. On a final note, while the Pokemon trading card game is a near perfect fit for the experience of the Pokemon video games, it does feel like a bit of an odd fit for Hololive. The system is weirdly adversarial, with Holomems using their performances to damage their rivals and destroy their opponent's life. I could never quite shake the feeling while playing that it felt a bit antithetical to everything that makes Hololive fun to watch in the first place. Beyond that, very little of the mechanics feel overly linked to Hololive, Vtubers, or even streaming and performing in general. Subscribers, viewers, chat, gaming, yapping, karaoke, ASMR, outfit reveals, none of this really feels represented in this game. Collabs are a fun mechanic, but it still feels odd to be limited to one at a time. What happens if you want to have an all-myth collab, for one example? There are a few other VTuber trading card games on the way, and I'm curious to see how they each approach trying to capture the VTuber flavor in a card game form. Overall, the changes this game makes to the Pokemon formula are good, and they help give this game its own unique identity outside of just being a Pokemon clone. But it's also not a radical departure from the formula either. If you're a big fan of Hololive, it's a solid enough game to get into. The pace, flow, and overall composition of gameplay is solid, and while a lot of the art is reused, I actually don't mind it here because it all does look very good. Speaking personally, as a VTuber fan in general, and as a fan of several Hololive VTubers more specifically, I will be picking up a box or two when it makes its way into English, eventually. But I'm also not sure how deep I'll be jumping into this game, and if you don't have any personal interest in Hololive, it is a lot harder to recommend. You'll likely get very similar gameplay and have a much easier time finding product in a playgroup if you just jump into the Pokemon trading card game instead. All that being said, I would love to hear your thoughts, especially if you've played Pokemon in the past. Does this look like a fun variation on the formula, or does it look a little too similar to really stand on its own? Best of luck taking your Oshi to the top, and have a fantastic day.